What if the voice telling you to slow down, to be satisfied, to finally rest is the very thing keeping you weak? What if the real danger isn't failure, pain, or suffering, but comfort? In Never Finished, David Goggins dismantles the idea of arrival. This is not a story about success. It's a declaration of war against complacency, excuses, and the lie that you're done growing. This book is about what happens after transformation, when the hunger must stay alive, when discipline must deepen, and when evolution becomes a lifelong obligation. The book opens like a military briefing. This is not motivation meant to make you feel good. This is a mission. You are warned up front. Growth requires confrontation, repetition, discomfort, and ruthless honesty. Goggins establishes that self-mastery has no finish line. The real work happens when no one is watching. From the very beginning, the reader is placed in a mindset of responsibility and urgency. This book demands engagement, not passive consumption. Goggins makes one thing clear immediately. This is not a self-help book. Self-help, in his view, is often shallow and temporary. What people actually need is a rewiring of belief. He introduces the concept of belief born from resilience, not hope. Hope is emotional and fleeting. Belief forged through suffering is durable. Through the famous rat experiment, Goggins reframes endurance as something deeper than optimism. The rats didn't survive because they hoped. They survived because they adapted, hardened, and believed through experience. This becomes the philosophical backbone of the book. He explains that belief cannot be gifted or borrowed. It must be earned through repeated exposure to discomfort. The introduction establishes the central theme. Evolution is not optional, and it never ends. Comfort weakens. Struggle sharpens. The mind must be trained like a weapon. Chapter 1. Maximize Minimal Potential. David Goggins opens this chapter by placing himself in a moment of public recognition, being honored at the Veterans of Foreign Wars National Convention. Sitting among decorated veterans and national heroes, he should feel pride. Instead, he feels disbelief, not because he thinks he didn't work hard enough, but because his origin story makes no sense when compared to where he ended up. This contradiction becomes the foundation of the chapter. Goggins frames his life through the idea of minimal potential. He explains that not everyone is born with advantages. Some people are handed stable families, encouragement, and opportunity. Others, like him, are handed violence, poverty, racism, fear, and chaos. From his earliest memories, life felt like survival rather than growth. Abuse from his father, constant fear in his own home, academic struggles, and social isolation shaped his identity as someone who merely endured rather than aspired. He describes how these early experiences trained him to go numb. Numbness became his coping mechanism. It allowed him to survive beatings and humiliation, but it also shut down ambition, curiosity, and self-belief. As a result, when life demanded effort later, education, discipline, commitment, he quit. Quitting didn't feel painful because numbness dulled everything. By the time he was 24 years old, Goggins found himself severely overweight, working a low-paying job as an exterminator, with no direction and no pride. His dreams of military service had collapsed after repeated failures, and his inner narrative was dominated by excuses. He blamed his father, his childhood, and his circumstances. While all of those things were real, they became shields protecting him from responsibility. The turning point in this chapter comes when Goggins confronts his past directly by visiting his father after years of separation. He believes this confrontation might give him closure or answers. Instead, it gives him something far more uncomfortable: clarity. His father is no longer the all-powerful monster of his childhood. He is a broken, weak man shaped by his own unresolved trauma. This realization strips Goggins of his final excuse. If his father is human and flawed, not a demon, then blaming him no longer works. In that moment, Goggins understands that while his past explains his pain, it does not control his future. Responsibility shifts entirely onto him. The core message of the chapter is that potential is not fixed or fairly distributed. Some people start far behind. But progress does not require maximum potential. It requires ownership. Goggins chooses to stop living as a victim of his past and instead become accountable for everything he is and everything he will become. This decision marks the true beginning of his evolution. Evolution 1. Using his experience as an EMT, Goggins introduces the idea of distracting injuries. These are wounds that look severe but aren't life-threatening, yet they consume all attention. Trauma, resentment, anger, and victimhood often function the same way. People cling to their stories because they justify weakness. But time does not stop. Life has a golden hour. If action isn't taken, opportunity expires. The evolution here is clear. Identify the distractions you use to avoid responsibility. Cut them away. Forward motion is the only cure. Chapter 2. Merry Christmas. In this chapter, Goggins explores trauma, denial, and memory through the lens of family and holidays. Christmas, typically associated with warmth and celebration, represents something very different for him. Growing up, holidays were just another opportunity for exploitation, stress, and emotional absence. There were no traditions, no safety, and no sense of belonging. The chapter centers on a family breakfast years later, where his brother and mother plan a trip back to Buffalo, the city where much of their shared trauma occurred. Goggins observes how differently each of them remembers the same childhood. His brother clings to a softened, idealized version of the past. His mother avoids her memories altogether. Goggins, in contrast, has forced himself to confront his trauma directly. Through this contrast, Goggins explains how denial works. Denial is protective. It allows people to function without being overwhelmed, but also limits growth. When pain is buried instead of processed, it distorts identity and prevents true self-awareness. Success achieved without emotional ownership feels hollow. The chapter then shifts into Goggins' professional life, where the theme of standing alone becomes central. He recounts how his first book was repeatedly rejected by the publishing industry. Experts dismissed his story as unmarketable. Despite this, Goggins refuses to compromise his vision or wait for validation. Against all advice, he chooses to self-publish, investing nearly all his savings. This decision reflects the same principle he applies to personal growth. If you believe in your path, you must be willing to walk it alone. Approval is not required. The chapter ends with a medical emergency when Goggins experiences atrial fibrillation. Even at the height of success, his physical vulnerability reminds him that strength is not permanent. Life offers no guarantees. This reinforces the urgency that drives him. There is no time to delay growth or responsibility. Evolution 2. The evolution emphasizes emotional ownership. Healing requires facing the truth, not rewriting it. Denial may reduce pain, but it also blocks power. Growth demands confrontation, even when it's uncomfortable or lonely. Chapter 3. The Mental Lab. This chapter introduces one of the most important concepts in the book. The mental lab. Goggins describes it as the internal environment where pain, failure, and discomfort are studied rather than avoided. Instead of reacting emotionally to hardship, he trains himself to observe it. The mental lab transforms suffering into data. Every moment of weakness becomes information. Every failure becomes an experiment. Goggins stops asking why something hurts and starts asking what it reveals. He explains that motivation is unreliable. Feelings change daily. Discipline, on the other hand, can be engineered. Through routines, standards, and repetition, Goggins builds systems that function regardless of mood. This chapter emphasizes the importance of self-awareness without self-pity. Goggins refuses to sugarcoat his shortcomings. He studies them relentlessly, knowing that improvement requires precision. The mental lab is where excuses die. It is where the mind is trained to stay functional under stress. Growth is no longer emotional. It is intentional. Evolution 3. You must become both scientist and subject. Observe your weaknesses without emotion. Test yourself daily. Growth is empirical, not inspirational. Chapter 4. A Savage Reborn. In this chapter, Goggins focuses on identity and reinvention. Transformation, he argues, is not permanent by default. Without vigilance, the mind drifts back toward comfort and old habits. He explains that success often creates a new danger: complacency. After achieving goals, many people relax. They believe the hardest part is over. Goggins rejects this idea completely. Being savage does not mean reckless aggression. It means controlled intensity. It means maintaining hunger even when life becomes easier. Goggins deliberately resists the temptation to slow down because he understands that stagnation begins quietly. Rebirth, in his philosophy, is not a single event. It is a repeated process. Each new level demands the death of the previous version of yourself. Comfort identities must be destroyed before they harden. Evolution 4. Rebirth is not a one-time event. It must be repeated. Kill the old version of yourself whenever it tries to return. Chapter 5. Disciple of Discipline. This chapter reframes discipline as devotion rather than punishment. Goggins explains that most people view discipline as restriction, something that limits freedom. He argues the opposite. Discipline creates freedom by expanding capacity. Through discipline, the mind learns to endure boredom, repetition, and discomfort. These traits give disciplined people an advantage when others rely on motivation and quit. Goggins emphasizes structure as protection. Routines remove decision fatigue and eliminate excuses. When life becomes chaotic, discipline acts as an anchor. Rather than chasing balance or ease, Goggins chooses consistency and standards. Discipline is not something he uses temporarily. It becomes part of his identity. By the end of this chapter, the message is clear. Discipline is not optional for growth. It is the price of self-respect and the foundation of sustained evolution. Evolution 5. Fall in love with structure. Let routine harden your mind so chaos doesn't break it. Chapter 6. The Art of Getting Hit in the Mouth. In this chapter, David Goggins dismantles the illusion of control. No matter how disciplined, prepared, or mentally tough you become, life will still hit you, often without warning and often when you least expect it. The problem is not getting hit. The problem is how people respond when they do. Goggins explains that many people build their confidence on the assumption that things will go according to plan. When those plans collapse through injury, illness, failure, or betrayal, their entire identity collapses with them. They are not prepared for disruption. They mistake preparation for immunity. Drawing from his experiences in combat training, endurance sports, and life-threatening medical episodes, Goggins emphasizes that resilience is not about avoiding pain, but about rapid recovery. Getting hit in the mouth is inevitable. Staying down is a choice. He explains that true toughness is measured in the moments immediately after failure, when excuses are easiest to accept. That is when character is revealed. The disciplined mind does not waste energy on shock or self-pity. It adapts. Goggins also highlights how emotional flinching drains strength. When people treat setbacks as injustices rather than realities, they lose momentum. The art is learning to absorb impact without surrendering standards. This chapter teaches that pain is not a signal to stop. It is feedback. Those who learn to interpret it correctly become nearly impossible to break. Evolution 6. Expect pain. Train for recovery. Emotional flinching wastes energy. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. In this chapter, Goggins confronts the cost of relentless self-mastery. Growth, obsession, and intensity are not free. They extract payment from relationships, comfort, and sometimes peace of mind. Rather than pretending balance comes naturally, Goggins acknowledges the tension between purpose and personal life. His standards are extreme, and that extremity creates friction. He does not romanticize the consequences, but he also refuses to dilute his mission to satisfy external expectations. The reckoning is about awareness, not regret. Goggins emphasizes that everyone pays a price for the life they choose, whether that price is discomfort or regret. Avoiding discomfort now only guarantees regret later. He challenges the idea that fulfillment comes from ease. For him, meaning is earned through struggle, even when that struggle isolates him. He accepts solitude as part of the path. This chapter forces the reader to confront an uncomfortable question. Are you willing to pay the price your goals demand, or are you quietly negotiating your standards to stay comfortable? Evolution 7. Know the cost. Pay it consciously. Never pretend growth is free. Chapter 8. Play until the whistle. This chapter destroys the myth of arrival. Goggins argues that the moment you believe you have made it is the moment decline begins. Growth does not retire. Standards do not age out. Using sports and military metaphors, he explains that many people mentally leave the field long before life is over. They slow down because society tells them they have earned rest. Goggins rejects that narrative entirely. Playing until the whistle means maintaining effort regardless of recognition, age, or status. It means holding yourself to standards even when no one else expects it of you. Goggins explains that excellence is personal. You do not lower your standards because others do. You do not slow down because the crowd is tired. The whistle has not blown. This chapter reinforces the idea that discipline is not situational. It is lifelong. As long as you are breathing, effort is required. Evolution 8. Do not slow down because others do. Standards are personal. Chapter 9. Wringing out the soul. The final chapter is about total extraction. Goggins challenges the reader to leave nothing unused. No hidden strength, no untested resolve, no reserved effort. He explains that regret comes not from failure, but from knowing you held something back. Most people live with untapped reserves, saving themselves for a later moment that never comes. Wringing out the soul means giving everything you have to the present task, knowing there are no guarantees of tomorrow. It is not about winning. It is about knowing you did not quit early, mentally, emotionally, or physically. Goggins emphasizes that evolution itself is the reward. There is no final destination, only continuous refinement. The chapter ends with the central truth of the book fully exposed. If you are alive, you are not finished. And if you are not finished, you still owe the world and yourself your full effort. Never finished is not a promise of success. It is a warning against stagnation. The book closes where it began, with responsibility. If you're still breathing, the work continues. The mind must be sharpened daily. Comfort must be resisted. And evolution must be earned again and again. You're not done. You will never be done. And that is the point.